everybody. Welcome to Truth Teller Tales. I'm Ellen, and I am dedicated to interviewing those truth seekers who became truth tellers in this most incredible time in our history. Today, I have a gentleman who, in my opinion, is the definition of a patriotic warrior in this great awakening because he was willing and did risk everything he worked for to stand for truth. And I'm honored and grateful to be able to interview Professor David K. Clements. Hi, David. This is such a cool experience for me. I can't tell you how grateful I am. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Ellen.
Well, I just want to start with, what you're doing now. And actually, um, the other night I just watched your latest commentary about the Dominion voting becoming Liberty Vote, I believe, and it's every one of your videos that you do are so beautifully done, and how they with the latest one talking about the tentacles um, and watching it was just it's not only the tentacles with the voting and what happened, obviously. The tentacles are in every part of our society, and you're just hitting on so many wonderful things, and, I mean, just share with us what you're doing now, and then I wanna go back and hear about you.
Okay. Yeah, well, I think the production, in some respects, is tied to my time as a trial attorney and getting in front of juries. And a lot of good trial attorneys dream of presenting complex issues in a way that really gets the job done. And you're often limited by what you can get in front of a jury, right? And so, um, having the medium of film is not lost on me. And so if you can imagine it in your mind, there's an opportunity to get past just the written word because the problem of Leviathan, as we call it, with all of these different vendors and entities, um, it's set up in a way to be confusing. And so you can lose your audience in writing an article by the time you've addressed the third corporate vendor that's trying to uh, conceal itself from you. So I think you need a visual medium. And that was something that we also tried to do in Let My People Go. And in some ways, that helped prepare me for these short kind of films every week that we put out, 15 to 25 minutes. So what I'm doing right now is I'm attempting to provide a one article, one video every Sunday that tries to give clarity. And I know what I am, and I know what I'm not. I am not someone who can keep up with kind of the current event, you know, mill,
Right.
and and so I want it to be something that's a little bit more reflective, a little bit more based in principle. That even if time changes in 20 minutes or in 20 years, that the principle will hold true. So I'm hoping that there's value in rewatching the videos no matter what season we're in. That's the goal.
Mhm.
And then behind the scenes, when I'm not doing the videos, I'm actually working on real projects concerning restoring our elections. So I'm a technical liaison with national security advisors. I'm under an NDA, so I can't really talk about any of that. But I try to do more than just provide commentary. I'm constantly pushing and trying to introduce people and that have credentials that hopefully the president will take hold of their expertise. And so a lot of what I do behind the scenes is to herd cats and try to get them all pointed in the same direction. And I've got varying degrees of success in doing that, but that occupies a great deal of my time.
Well, it's incredibly important, and, and I wanna talk about your story, but obviously, everything had to happen to lead you here, right? Everything as dramatic and crazy and scary. I'm sure it was at times, to stand for truth. So I want to start and hear about that and hear from the beginning. Tell me, um, your life, where you were born, your childhood, just how
Mm.
things started out for you.
Hmm. Yeah, I was born in Seattle, Washington, um, trailer park kid, and kind of jumped around the nation for good 18 years. Didn't have much of a say
Wow.
on where I could, where I wanted to be, but S- San Diego, Orlando, Florida, Monument, Colorado, Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and my dad worked for a big military contractor, one of the primes, and he was an accountant and a whistleblower and exposed a great deal of fraud, waste, and abuse. And as a result of that, a father of 5 kids was, um, kicked to the curb, and everyone that was responsible for the fraud were given promotions. And so that just shows you kind of the heart of the beast. And so I kind of got exposed to that at a very young age, seeing my father, who was very, very smart, um,
Mhm.
lose his career and effectively, you know, bag groceries and process insurance claims at night. And my mom, who had a full-time job as a homemaker, had to take on 2 jobs at Kmart and at Lowe's Home Improvement. So, um, so it forced me to grow up pretty at a pretty young age. And in some ways, it's worse when you had some stability or some money and then you don't. So there are people that are, they grow up poor and that's all they know, and that's fine. In some ways, it kind of screwed me up because we uh, ascended to the middle class, had a nice picturesque home and stability, and then we went from there to being really, really poor. And so I was, in many respects, raised by my peers in pub culture, working at bars and restaurants and things like that in Myrtle Beach. And I'm a punk rocker at heart. I grew up playing live music, really for the better part of 30 years, even until up to COVID. And then when they shut down everything, playing music stopped. But that's the background on kind of just me at a human level and having nothing to do with
Yes,
elections or exposure.
right. Well, that's
Um,
what I wanna hear, and so back then, if you were moving around so much, did you switch schools? Were you homeschooled? Were you I mean, how did that look?
yeah, I was byproduct of the public education system. I was not a very good student. I might have the thickest disciplinary file in the history of Myrtle Beach High School. So I was a troublemaker, and I think part of it was just I've got a heavy resistance to, I think, brainwashing, and a lot of that's just
Yes.
there. I question everything, so it made me a very, very difficult student in the public
Yeah.
school system. So I was suspended all the time. I got in fights all the time. Um, I would always ask the larger questions on how is what I'm doing right now in a classroom going to serve me in the real world, especially when you don't have money.
Right.
Going to college was not a foregone conclusion from where I was living. I lived in
Mhm.
probably the roughest part of Myrtle Beach. You can tell by how rich someone is by what avenue they live on. And so if you're at like 83rd Avenue North, you're like rich country club. Um, and if you go down, you could basically tell how much someone makes per year. I lived on 11th Avenue South. So about 90 blocks from the richest to the poorest, and lived down the street from a porno store, a gay club. I had walked in a warehouse district to get to Godfather's Pizza where I, bust tables. So very, very unceremonious living. And but you see dysfunction, and I think that's what's served me well in my career as a prosecutor is that you're around a bunch of rabid survivors that
Right.
are engaged in domestic violence, heavy drinking, drug use. And by the time I became a prosecutor, almost every victim or case that I came across, I grew up in that environment. And so it was
Right.
very easy for me. If I had been insulated, that job would have been much more difficult because rarely is someone what they tell you they are. And you kind of have
Yeah.
to read facial tics and every time I'd have someone on the stand in a case, uh, there's always something that would trigger a memory of the world that I grew up in. And so it kind of gives you an intuition or a sixth sense that has served me well.
Yeah.
And yeah.
And so during that time too, it's this when you were had that instability, even though you were, a troublemaker and everything, what do you think kept you from getting absorbed in it? Were you athletic? Did you have
Mm.
a mentor here or there? I mean, how did that
Mm.
go about?
Well, I think first I'd have to be candid. I did get absorbed into it, and didn't. I mean, I think God's hand of protection was always on me to keep me from um, keeling over. But I've part of my testimony as a believer is I had a self induced cardiac arrest from drug and alcohol abuse at the age of 21. So basically, it's not a heart attack, but it's as close as you can get to a heart attack through just pumping your body full of things that shouldn't be combined. So I lived up the lifestyle for sure. I really and I think it was more about self medicating because I obviously was in distress from just what had happened to my parents and not really feeling like I was going to amount to anything or go anywhere. And so what do you do? If you're a young
Mhm,
kid, you smoke joints, you drink shots, you take pills, and so I've jokingly said many times that I did every drug that Mike Lindell didn't do, and to excess, and it brought me to death's doorstep a few times, and I knew that I needed to leave um, my surroundings because I didn't have the ability to say no to my friends and my peers, and I wasn't like I don't think I was ever mean spirited. I think I always had the same heart. I
mhm,
think I was fundamentally an honest person, but still broken, and I didn't have an ability to say no to a good time. And
mhm,
so I found a state and a city that where I virtually knew no one, and that's what led me to the desert, to the wilderness of New Mexico, and it was really to get clean. And so this was before I had a degree or any credentials. This was, I mean, I had some technical college. I took some classes, but my my dream was to maybe get an associate's degree in physical therapy
mhm.
and make 36 grand. To me, it's like I could afford an apartment, go to the
Yeah.
movies once a week, and to me that was like remarkably better than my life experience. So that was the full dream for me is I can get an associate's degree, make 30 grand. I can go to the theater comfortably, and I could go to the pub and have a beer every once in a while. And that was
So
it. And if I could keep playing music, fantastic. Um,
so
and
so I just wanna go back to that pivotal thing that happened to you when you were 21. Physically, how long did it take you to get back, and what happened first? What changed in you happened first? Was it the physical or the mental after that happened to you?
I think you can't separate the two. But for me, um, I had one very, very traumatic event where I thought I was going to die because of the cardiac arrest. And it was enough to scare me sober for a few days. And then I, got the call to go out and I ended up imbibing a little bit. And almost immediately my body was physically saying, you fool. And
Mhm,
so I would get these kind of heart murmurs several more times, but it was really clear that you know, I was on borrowed time. And I
mhm,
actually remember going to a movie with a friend, and the movie I remember it because it's such a key moment in my life was Artificial Intelligence. It was a Stanley Kubrick film that he wasn't able to complete because he passed, and Steven Spielberg took it over. And if you've seen it, it's a really it's a downer. It's such an existential, depressing, godless film. And I just left the film and I told my friend, I'm I'm leaving. He's like, "What do you mean you're leaving?" He's like, "I am leaving." He's like, "Where are you going?" "I don't know, but I'm not gonna be here." And it was so abrupt that I told my friends, "Anything in my apartment, take it." So I had some furniture, couches, TVs, game systems. I had a car that didn't run very well. And so basically I said, "Anything in there, it's yours for the taking because I'm leaving." And I ended up like hitching a ride to Myrtle Beach, and I got my old teenage job at Godfather's Pizza for like 2 weeks, just enough to earn money for an airline ticket. And I arrived in New Mexico literally with, 1 suitcase, a tennis racket because I play tennis, which is weird, and a three-piece green polyester suit that, I thought was just a funny looking suit that I took out of one of my friend's closets, and so, you know, it just a kind of a
Ah,
ridiculous mess. And, but when I got to New Mexico, um, I couldn't find a job anywhere, and the job that I first got was actually at Walmart during the graveyard shift. And so I stocked canned goods on aisle 6, from 10 o'clock at night till 6 in the morning, which ended up being a, providential blessing because it kept me out of the bars. I couldn't go out,
uh-huh.
and I was so broke that I needed to work hours, and then I ended up getting a second job at Blockbuster Video, if people can recall the days
Yeah,
of
yeah.
that. And then I got a third job, waiting tables at a coffee shop, cafe. And so what I try to do is just work myself ragged to where I had no opportunity, um, or temptation to go out and consume. And then I started working out. Now I was still doing one drug to excess, and it was, um, ephedra, which is a form of speed. And that's what helped me work 3 jobs, but I used it to go work out and try to get in shape, and so you have to look at my mind was crazy, so, the things that you justify to keep doing, so I don't know if that was smart, but I'm just being honest, that's what I did,
Yeah.
and it allowed me to work several jobs, and, at one of those jobs, one night, a woman that would become my wife came in the door with her sister, and that was the coffee shop. And I just remember just being so taken by their innocence. It was like they carried a spiritual presence with them.
Oh,
Um, and I thought they were like way younger than me. So I wasn't thinking in terms of, wow, I really like to date this woman. Um, but they were playing checkers on a Saturday night, and it just seemed so innocent compared to my upbringing, which is punk rock, bars, drugs. And I'm in this kind of 3 months in to sobriety. And so I am functioning differently. I'm thinking differently. I don't necessarily have the deep-seated desire to go out and drink and do drugs. So this was probably as together as I'd ever been, but not in a spiritual way. I wasn't a believer. I had been a nominal attendee of different churches throughout the years,
mhm.
and, culturally, you could say I was Christian, but there was no fruit.
Right.
Um, and, so I kinda had this self-imposed, um, kind of therapy of work, 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 and then, uh, these girls come in. And I
Mhm.
remember just asking them where they went to school, and, Erin, who's my wife, told me that she was, um, about to graduate from NMSU with a degree in civil engineering, and so I did the math, and basically, while she has retained her youth and I'm aging in dog years, at one time, we were like 1 year difference in age, and, I'm like, "Oh, wow." And so I just kinda saw her with new eyes. I'm like, "We're like the same age, and she's gorgeous," and I felt like God was, just put her in a tractor beam for me, and I really had a fear that if she left that night, I wouldn't see her again. So I did something that you would never do, at least something that I would never do, which is jeopardize my job by asking her for her number because she could have complained, like, "What's the deal with someone hitting on
Right.
me?" And she would tell you she did something that she would never do, which is, you know, communicate with a complete stranger and go on a date. Well, a few days
Yeah.
later, we go on a date, and it was a perfect date. I mean, when I say perfect, um, it was just I was so comfortable with her, and she was so comfortable with me, and yet we come from completely different backgrounds. Her parents are short-term missionaries, very big evangelicals. She was valedictorian, highest honors at the business college. She's just, a she's exactly who you don't if you have a daughter, you don't want her dating someone like me at the time. And if you wanted to gauge, her parents' fear at her meeting me by the amount of books, Christian books they give you, um, I had stacks and stacks of books handed to me. So
That's funny.
in any event, great, perfect first date, and then every date afterwards successfully got worse and worse and worse, and I realized there was something, spiritually that was missing that I couldn't perform or kinda keep up, um, with her because she was a godly woman. She is a godly woman, and, so I went home and looked at, kind of the mirror in the medicine cabinet, and I said the skeptic's prayer. It's like, she knows who you are if you exist. I don't. I don't wanna fake it. I don't wanna, like, trick her into thinking that I've got this Christianity, when it's not sincere or authentic. And, so if you exist, please reveal yourself to me, was the prayer. And I went to bed, and I woke up the next morning. I didn't have anything that was earth shattering, but, it's like scales being dropped from your eyes, and I could see, spiritually. And, if I had to describe what I saw my own sin. For the first time in my life, I could see my sin clearly, which is great if you want to be boyfriend or husband material. And I
Mhm.
I really wanted, to have a relationship with her because she's such a remarkable person. And fast forward, 21 years of marriage, she was
Wow.
really the genesis. She led me to a saving faith in Christ. And because of that, everything that I've stumbled and wrestled with, addiction, you know, God's using it now, and,
Right.
in a really cool way.
That's so I love that story so much. And so because of that relationship, do you is that what changed your goal in life from getting an associate degree to then going on?
Well, I think what it was is, um, I knew that she was marrying down and I
Yeah.
was marrying up. And so, yeah, I was self-aware that, like, she deserves better, my best. And I wasn't a particularly good student before I met her. And, what was really cool is, she convinced me, she's like, go back to college. And not only did I go back to college, I was taking 18 to 21 credit hours a semester, which is
Whoa.
an insane load.
Yeah.
And, I was making straight A's. I think, I ended up graduating with, like, a 3.7 GPA, and the only reason why it wasn't a 4.0 was because of the credits that I transferred over from technical college before I met her. So I was essentially a straight A student and got a, 4-year degree in about, 2 years. So,
Wow.
that was also something that was just God. Like,
Yeah.
I was coming to terms with, like, I'm not really an idiot. I'm not
Yeah.
this class clown fool, which is kinda what I convinced myself as just a guy that, liked to cut up. And, so I was able to adapt and learn things really, really quickly. And she was kind of a disciplinarian. In some ways, she got a raw deal in the first 10 years of our marriage. It's like she's raising before we had kids, she was raising her first child, which was me. But she was a tutor, and she'd help me learn things and not cut corners, and 'cause she was an incredible student. And, yeah, so I ended up getting, in the last year of my undergrad 2 opportunities presented themselves because instead of, getting an associate's degree in physical therapy, I thought I would go to physical therapy school. And, uh, and part of that is because I remember just loving this movie called Regarding Henry with, Harrison Ford, where he gets shot in the head and he's gotta get rehabbed, and there's this really cool character that puts him through physical therapy. I'm like, "I kinda wanna be that guy." Um, but I also had a memory of working at physical therapy offices as a technician and remember just being bored out of my mind in the sense that there's only,
Mhm.
like, one way to really rehab a knee, depending on the
Yeah.
injury, or shoulder, and so I got this vision of, like, saying, "Okay, 10 more reps, up, down, up, down." Like, that's gonna be my life for the next 30 years, just, "Alright, good job." Wipe down the equipment. And, um, and I knew that that wasn't something it would have been a great quality of life, really, really stress-free, but, I didn't feel this desire, and now that I had really good grades, I could consider, 2 career paths that would have been inconceivable to me, which was, to either go to medical school or go to law school. And medical school was too close to the physical therapy stuff. I mean, I think it would have been
Mhm.
more rewarding, but, looking back now, the pharmaceutical bent and just the notion of you go to basically be a peddler of drugs wasn't appealing. And my personality, because I played in music, there was a creative, performative aspect that I found really, really attractive about trial attorneys. So I would watch shows on TV like The Practice, and I'd just be sucked in. And what I loved about them wasn't really the law. I just loved trial. I love watching trials. I love watching Perry Mason. I love watching The Practice. Um, and I just love those moments where someone's on the stand, where you have these aha moments. And
Yeah.
there's some truth to it. I mean, obviously, people take liberties with it, but like I think if I can get in to law school, let me try. And so and one of the things that's great about the legal profession, there's very few. This might be the only thing that's great about it is you don't have to have a legal undergraduate degree to get in. You can virtually have any background. And so the fact that I was a kinesiology major that's looking at dynamic movements of physiology as my focus, um, it didn't set me back. So
Mhm.
I took the LSAT. I eked out a score that was good enough to get me in to William Mitchell, which was in Minnesota. And then I ended up transferring back to New Mexico because I had assurances that I could have a job here right out of law school. And so I clerked for a federal judge. I was one of the, I think, first students that actually had a license to prosecute while I was a law student. There's a special rule, and I say first one, not for municipal or magistrate work, but to do felony work. Everyone would basically go to muni court and do traffic stop type stuff. And
Mhm.
I've always been ambitious. It's like, in trying to do things that you probably have no business doing. I'm like, "Is there any reason why I can't do felonies as a student?" And they're like, "Technically, no. It rarely happens." So in my 3rd year of law school, I was actually in district court, doing suppression hearings, one of which had to do with a helicopter and infrared scanning of stuff, and so I had a knack for getting into stuff. I was even 3rd chair for about 24 hours on a murder case as a law student
Yeah.
because the prosecution team in Albuquerque loved me so much. They just loved how I had such a mind for presentation. Like I
Yeah.
because I watched so many movies and stuff. I'm like, "Well, how do you think about doing this?" Like, "That's an incredible idea." The next thing you know, they're like, "We'll have him 3rd chair." Well, the head supervisor's like, "Are you kidding me? A 3rd year law student, 3rd chair on a murder case? Like, you've lost your mind." Like, "Yeah, but we like him." So I was kinda like a pet.
That's
That
funny.
didn't last long, but that's the kinda stuff where I was getting exposed to, and then, after, law school, I ended up working for one of the most prestigious civil law firms in Southern New Mexico, which is where my wife's from and where I had lived and where I went to school. And I did that for about 2 years, and I hated it. I
Oh,
hated
wow.
yeah, I hated the fact that I couldn't get into a courtroom, that there was never enough rubber meets road moments where there's so much posturing and so much discovery. And basically, the closest thing to a trial is a deposition. And I
Mhm.
hated the billable hour. I mean, right now I have such an intuitive sense of a clock because of the button you press in increment, because you charge clients in increments of whatever, point two, I think is the increment. And I just hated that, feeling like I was tied to a clock and I really wasn't serving an end goal. Some people can do it. I couldn't do it. I was serving
Mhm.
a clock that was always on. And so I ended up voicing my frustration with the firm that, like, I want trial experience. Well, you can only get in the door if you've got experience. Well, how do I? Oh, I'm sorry, coffee. How do I get experience? Well, you can, second share on a case that I'm doing, but you can't bill for it. Well, if you're not billing, you don't get to survive in, the private sector.
Right.
So I ended up applying to the public defender's office of all places because I was a defense
Wow.
attorney. And
Mhm.
again, I'm punk rock. I don't see the man or prosecution as the good guys in many respects, and they lost my application. So I ended up applying to the DA's office, and I get interviewed. And um, I think on my second day, I did my first jury trial, and they throw you to the wolves. I did 56 jury trials the first year, and
Wow.
which is an incredible clip. But you're in a mill. You're going to do a ton of DWI cases, domestic violence cases, and I loved it. And I was getting paid next to nothing. I actually took a 30 grand pay cut to go from the law firm to work for the DAs, as someone who's poor, and my wife who's like, I took a chance on you. Now you're getting paid 50 grand a year as a lawyer. It's
Yeah.
like, that's thanks a lot. So we never really had money, because I was always doing public service. And so we would, um, I did as many cases as I could. I loved it. And then my boss was up for an election, and you start to see kind of even then the change of how elections were being subverted, and people that should not have had office somehow got in the door. So I worked for a very,
Mhm.
very competent prosecutor, and she lost an election to a criminal defense moron, a guy that had no business running an agency, but he got in somehow. And he got in, I think, because our elections were rigged even then.
Mhm.
Um, and which was terrible because you don't want to be a part of an office that's run by a cartel lawyer.
Right.
And a lot of these guys were absolutely cartel lawyers before they infiltrated themselves into the DA's office. And along the border, I'm telling you right now, most of our prosecutors are probably have greater allegiance to the cartels than they do to their oath of office. Now I've seen it firsthand. Um, so I had a dilemma. I needed to get the hell out of there, but
Mhm.
in the meantime, none of them wanted to go to trial. None of the new people, the new administration. So what happens is when you have an election and a cartel DA comes in, he appoints all of his friends for all of the high paying positions. And because
Mm.
I was so low on the totem pole, I wasn't threatening to them. And so they hated going to trial, and they hated doing their job for to go after the bad guys. And so I ended up taking every case that I could to build my resume, in order to be more attractive to the market to get out of there. And so I ended up taking like 26 felony trials in a very, very short period. And these were cases that for my experience at the time, I had no business getting. Um,
Mhm.
but they were so reckless, like, yeah, give it to Clements. And I took all of them, and I did really well. I don't think I lost a trial. I mean, I was a really good trial attorney. And, because to me, it was like theater.
Yep.
This was like a punk rock stage I could perform and pull out all the tricks, and some of the stuff I kinda laugh at now that I tried, that I learned from watching My Cousin Vinny or any of
Yeah.
the shows. But I love the craft of being a trial attorney. Um, was able to get a job because of my experience, and ended up being the senior high intensity drug trafficking areas attorney for 3
Wow.
counties on the border. So I was kind of the top, um, prosecutor on the border tasked with confronting, the cartel and trafficking. And in that phase of my career, find out that my office that I went to was completely corrupt, completely compromised. My task force had members that were, meth heads, that were sleeping with the wives of cartel members that were in jail. It was an absolute mess. You'd go to hearings and judges would come out with white powder on their nose and I ended up having a case that ended up being pretty providential in, um, big impact. This was around Edward Snowden's disclosures, on, the NSA spying on Americans, et cetera. And I
Mhm.
came to learn of a tool called PRISM, which was used by special operations. And the DEA is part of special operations. And my task force had DEA members. So I'd end up getting these bizarre cases where a dog would just know to alert to a propane tank on a truck in the middle of a grocery store parking lot. And I'm sitting there going, "How in the world did you guys know to put the dog there?" Like I'm like asking these questions and I get these bizarre answers that would never add up. Well,
Mhm.
come to find out that, I'm 99.9% certain that they were using this PRISM tool, to do illegal searches to get into the place, and they were taught parallel reconstruction, which is we're going to have you falsify your records to where no one has any clue that we're using this tool, which is
Wow.
highly illegal. It violates people's confrontation rights. And I called in the task force to confront them about these bizarre things. And there's a big story. But needless to say, if you've ever seen the movie Sicario, these are rough, kind of intimidating guys. They come in there and they're in all their flak gear and like they just got out of the gym, and they just start letting me know how it's going to be. We've been doing this a long time. We get drugs off the street. Now, what they don't tell you is that they'll actually, sell drugs out of the evidence locker. Um, it's so corrupt. And so I
Yeah.
just remember telling them, okay, well, I'm going to dismiss all the cases that I've identified these things, which didn't bother them at all, by the way, because they want to keep their business going.
Mhm.
But I said, unlike the dismissals that you're used to, I'm going to name you in the dismissals publicly. And they were just absolutely shocked that I would do that. Because normally you can dismiss a case based on the interest of justice. It's basically a 2-word sentence on a filing. And so I found 10 cases where I'm certain they were using PRISM. And then I walked across the street with those 10 cases, filed the dismissals with these agents publicly named in them, um, that it was in the interest of justice because they're corrupt. And the judge that I asked to speak with, because this was really important, I didn't want anyone to think that I was dismissing cases because I'm corrupt, but that's how bad it was. So I ended up going to Judge Daniel Viramontes' chambers, and I told him what I had found. And I remember even telling him, like, I don't know if you're corrupt. I don't even know if you're part of the cartels, but I need you to know I'm not, and I'm dismissing these cases for these reasons. He didn't say a word, so I don't know if he was or wasn't, but it was important. Then I went to the public defender's office and I gave them my findings, and I told them, if you care about doing your job, I would appeal every drug conviction out of this office going back to 2006. And I gave them the receipts, and they didn't do anything because they were also cartel lawyers. And there's a place where you actually allow for people to go to jail as long as they're low level mules. And
Mhm.
so they're fine. They part of the system and part of the subversion is to have people, have the at least the facade of justice where so what happens is you'll get convictions on a bunch of nothing cases. But the
Mhm.
real corruption's actually in the judiciary. It was in my office. And so I ended up having a sit down with the DA I worked with there, um, Francesca Estevez,
Hmm.
and she was um, I won't say that she was part of the cartel, but I'll give you one example of why I stopped working there. There was a civilian that took video recording of a state car, a car with state plates that was weaving in and out of traffic. And for 9 minutes, the civilian's recording the state car weaving, calls the police. The police pull over the state car. And the driver is the DA. And she is blitzed out of her mind on drugs. There's even video of her practicing the field sobriety test before the state police come there. Needless to say, the state police did not charge her. They did not prosecute her. And this was on the news. And I'm sitting there and I remember meeting with her in some, you know, hole in the wall restaurant in the middle of the desert. And I said, do you realize that you've made it impossible for me to ever get another conviction for DWI? I'm going to have jurors that are in a part of the panel that are going to know that my boss got away with something that she shouldn't have. So
Yeah.
I can't work here. I said, I will stay here if you will commit to cleaning out the corruption we have in our own office. But that's a bigger threat to justice here, our own office, than the people that we're arresting. And so I quit. She wasn't interested in that.
Yeah, sure
And
not.
I ended up running for, I started getting into politics as a county commissioner, not a county commissioner, but a county chairman for the Republican Party, and found out there it was just as corrupt as anything that I was doing. And so all I was seeing was corruption after
Right.
corruption after
Yeah.
corruption. No matter where I go, God
Yeah.
kind of gave me a front row seat on places that you would think are full of good guys and good women.
Right.
And after doing that, I ended up running for the United States Senate, and um, the corruption and the abuse and the slander and the lawfare. I was not part of the club, and
Yeah.
it was one of the most difficult periods of my life. And then after that, I was kind of put out to pasture and needed a job. So I went back to being a prosecutor, but told the prospective hiring committee that I didn't want to do anything related to drugs because of what my experience. I said, give me violent crimes. Just give me murder cases, give me attempted murder cases, and I'll be fine. And they did. So I ended up for 4 years taking over Lincoln County's prosecutions, and ended up doing some of the most gruesome murder cases and stuff you wouldn't believe. The stuff that I have seen is so dark and gruesome. So I did that for the better part of 4 years.
Wow.
Probably did more trials than anyone in the country for about a 4 year period because we were so understaffed and under resourced. And it really affected um, my marriage because I was married to my job. I was on call. Um, I didn't see my kids. And so, between the corruption of what I saw work and um, my run for Senate,
Mhm.
I was burning myself out pretty quickly,
Mhm.
and ended up applying to my old alma mater for a law professor gig, and didn't think for a second I'd get it. It's almost as if
Mhm.
God concealed the eyes of everyone there to not really look closely at my politics or where I came from, because they don't hire conservatives. They don't.
Mhm.
And it was concealed to them. And I think part of it is because I look like a lefty. I'm they see me like, oh, he's one of us. And
Yes.
so, I got in, and then I ended up acquitting myself really well. So even before that, I was a prosecutor of the year, and then I was a two-time nominee for teaching excellence, and I won it the day
Yeah.
before I was suspended. So um, all of that, all of that kind of led me to 2020, and you
Yeah.
can maybe draw some inferences on why my mind picked up on what we saw on November 3rd, and why it was really important to me to sound the alarm.
That is crazy. It's so fascinating when you lay out, and I love hearing these stories because when you lay out your story, it's so divine in that every step had to happen in everyone's story when they reflect back in their lives to get them to where they are, and every step of the way. So, I mean, it's just a remarkable thing. And then, so there you are as a professor, and you're winning all these awards, incredible professor to these students. And what changes everything is a pandemic where you're saying, we're not wearing masks and we're not, that was, that, that was the beginning of your whole shift, correct?
Yeah, well, it was a big identity shift, and I'll be honest, I love my job as a professor. The students are wonderful. It gave me the creative outlet to
Yeah.
teach and present things, but the stakes were low. I like that because you do something that's so, um, blood pressure inducing for 10 years,
Mhm.
and, I didn't sleep. I mean, and so because you couldn't, you're always in knots, like, "Oh my god, if I don't win this case, I'm gonna be in the front page of a newspaper. I'm gonna have to stare at a victim, say that I'm sorry that I didn't get, the killer of your daughter." And so you're constantly just, um anxiety does not begin to describe, my career, and
Mhm.
you really have to get used to just, having 0 control over anything. So you're really thrown into this blender, and, so when 2020 happened, trust me, I didn't wanna get involved, because I had a great gig. Like, I
Mhm.
could sleep in. I mean, the worst thing that I had to worry about was a kid, an 18-year-old kid pissed off at me because they got a C on a paper when they
Yeah.
really deserved an F, but I was being charitable, but they thought they needed to get an A,
Yeah.
and so that was it, and so, I was able to mend my marriage, I was able to dedicate more time to my wife, I was able to spend more quality time with my children, um, I was able to work out for the first time in, like, years, like, go to a gym and just take care of myself. And I think that 3-year period of teaching really was just, "Okay, rest up because the end of the world is now coming." And,
Yeah.
um, and when November 3rd happened, everything slowed down for me, and it's hard for me to describe this. It was as if my cognitive faculties had never worked, better. And while I was a very successful teacher and attorney, I can tell you that this was very different. This was definitely the Holy Spirit, um, tapping me on the shoulder and giving me downloads that were effortless. The only expenditure of energy was to keep up with the vision that was being, provided. And, when you see things so clearly, you've kind of got no choice but to sound the alarm.
Yeah.
And so, January 6th really hit me in a different way. I wasn't at Washington, but it really serves up as the catalyst for all of my involvement. So while I can describe all of these experiences, people might draw the false conclusion that I got into this because I'm a prosecutor and professor and I've gone after the bad guys. No. Um, January 6th, to me, I've described it as when Congress allowed for a false flag to occur
Yes.
and they let the pseudo breach occur right when Arizona's electors objected. And in 2
Right.
hours' time, they came back and, were more prepared to give the speech about why they can't look at fraud and why we all need to just move on. Uh,
Right.
that was the most viscerally disgusting thing that I'd ever seen beyond anything I'd done as a prosecutor, because you could tell there's
Mhm.
something that was so demonic that was radiating in that room when Kelly Loeffler and Mitch McConnell and Mitt Romney lying through their teeth. And for people like me that were desperate to keep Trump in, when I realized that he was a great president, I'm sitting there going, I'm in Wilkeville right now at the university. If Biden comes in, it's they're going to go for the jugular. It's going to be tranny this, tranny that, they, them, they, them, they, them. Because that, where I worked was the epicenter of that kind of thinking.
Uh,
And so I was glued to every case. I was reading every case, looking at every challenge. And January 6th, 2021, I'm start off looking at RSBN and the feeds, and I'm just sitting there going, "This is joyous. The Holy Spirit's there. Look at them singing and praying, and like this is MAGA. This is great." And then I go up and drive 2 hours to my cabin. I keep watching stuff, and then the quote unquote breach happens, and I see what happens on C-SPAN with the betrayal, and it's literally everyone stabbing Trump in the back. It's like Caesar all over again.
Mhm,
And I just remember walking outside with no hope, zero hope,
mhm.
and I ended up having the first supernatural experience of my life that changed everything for me. I felt like I was given a divine charge, and everything that I've done since that day has had everything to do with that experience, and very little to do with everything else that I've shared with you, which was I just was given such purpose. And so everything that I did after that was basically something that would destroy my career, my name, my reputation,
Yes.
all things that would solidify self-preservation from a bank account, um, was taken away in pretty short order. And I'm 5 years now, still here, still standing. But yeah, it's all because of
So
that.
it is, and so I have questions for you, of course, but I have to interject this really small thing. I was there January 6th, and I have to say because of what you said, um, it was the most beautiful. I was there by myself because my family thought I was nuts, you know? So it was, I have to just reiterate what you said. I was there. It was the most beautiful, wonderful, loving, badass walk. And until I got to the lawn, and I have to say what you just said too, something dark and awful, and it was a energy I've never felt before, and I'm not good at reading energies or anything like that, but I saw Molotov cocktails. I saw weird it was the weirdest, and I turned around and walked back, and right then my daughter had called me who was seeing, "Mom, what's going on?" I'm like, "Okay, I left, I left." And I left, and I had that same feeling. They shut everything down, treated us all like criminals, and it was all just shut down. And I remember being in the hotel room crying because I
Mhm.
knew we were being duped. It was the biggest deception, and I, like you, had I was just had 0 goodness confidence that we were gonna get out of this. I knew we were duped, and 18 days later, I had a spiritual thing happen to me after
Mm.
that, and after that, my life has changed after
Yeah.
that happened to me. So, I don't know if it was though it was so dark, it was also the accumulation of such good
Mhm.
people, it it did something to people like us, for sure. So it's just a phenomenal thing. And so after that happened and you were willing to lose, and you looked at things with different eyes, did you ever think back of your dad who went through the same thing? Did you ever think, "Oh my gosh, I'm doing just what my
Mm.
my dad did"? You risk losing everything, or were you just, nope, you knew you could get through it, you knew you were on this different path?
Well, it's weird because my dad and I are estranged over my politics and my choices, and so I see the parallels, but and I don't want people to misinterpret what I'm saying. I love my father, and
Mhm.
he's a fundamentally honest person, but we don't see the world the same way. And when he was 40 with 5 kids, he was put out to pasture, and I think he effectively was wrestling with kind of, I don't wanna say midlife crisis, but he, I think, succumbed to the demoralization and the depression that came from being this promising person that tried to do everything right by the book, and he kind of just went on autopilot and gave up. And so he was just waiting for his youngest kid to turn 18 so he could just kind of leave. And that's what he
Mhm.
did. So I'm sensitive to that. That my parents separated, then divorced, and a lot of it was because I think my dad was broken by his
Mhm.
experience. Um, so around the age of 40, the parallels are very similar, but I've been very conscious of, like, I don't want to give up. I don't want,
Mhm.
it's like everyone, we all kind of are therapists where we analyze the the wounds that our parents give us, and we usually miss the wounds that we're giving to our children,
Yeah.
um, and so I don't want people to think that I've got it figured out, but I have internalized the things that wounded me as a kid, uh, in what I don't wanna be as a husband to my wife, because I don't wanna see my wife hurt the way that my mother was hurt, and the things that my dad might not even be aware of that
Mhm.
hurt us on just kinda giving up the fight. And so by the time, I entered into my marriage with Erin and was marrying way above my pay grade, um, I certainly cultivated an attitude of I am not going to give up on anything. I'm going to fight for everything. And being a prosecutor really honed that. I had a great mentor, and you just you have to cultivate an attitude that I will not be bullied, because everyone comes after you as a prosecutor. Every defense attorney gaslights you. Every email is this heavy-handed, you know, bluff. There's posturing, and you kind of get so used to it that you become immune to it. So it's really hard or very difficult to intimidate me. And I'm not saying this from
Yep.
a place of bravado. It's just you get used
Right.
to seeing people do it, and at some point it becomes comical.
Mhm.
And so when 2020 came around, yeah, I'd get journalists reaching out. I know they're going to write a hit piece to destroy me, or I'm going to have people, I had Congress reaching out, basically threatening me. I've had death threats, but I had death threats even before this as a prosecutor. So I was prepared to say, okay, well, it's kind of more of the same. It's just a bigger audience. So
Right.
as long as I'm okay with God being all right with me. And so I
Yeah.
talk about, for me, one of my meditations is just there's a target audience of one.
Mhm.
And really all I care about is when I get up, uh, God, are you happy with me? So I try to please my Father, my Father in heaven. And
Mhm.
to the degree that I can hear his voice and discern what he wants from me, that's all I focus on. Because if as soon as you start thinking about what a paper or even an influential person that you might admire thinks of you, you
Mhm.
spiral. You spiral.
Right.
You're weak. And so I've had ups and lows. I've had bouts of paranoia. I mean, there's confusing things. Everyone that's made an impact in this movement over the past 5 years, you can't help but circle the toilet bowl with people that you find out later aren't honest or good people. Um, but it's allowed me to stay grounded and to really just put to death the things that I thought were important before, which they are important in some respects. But the idea of having a career and
Mhm.
an obituary that everyone's gonna really
Mhm.
like when you're dead. I mean, that's what I think of.
Mhm.
It's just an obituary that we're creating, but you have this in your mind that I want my kids to go to good schools. I want them to go to college. I'm gonna have my 401k taken care
Yep.
of. I'm gonna have savings. I'm going to get to a place where I can have material comfort.
Right.
And as soon as I put that to death
Mhm.
and really looked at the scriptures on how to live, and it's day by day, I've traded in safety and stability for an adventure. And there's times where I want out. I want to get off this treadmill so bad.
Mhm.
I actually want to have something in the bank account. I want my kids to have it, but that's not the way that God relates with His people, which is,
Right.
I've got a purpose for you. Just do what I say, and you'll be fine.
Yes.
And, and for 5 years, he has proven that to be true. My kids have not gone hungry. We have not had any issues paying the bills, and it's always in really weird things like a random stranger comes up to me and says, "God told me to give you this," and it's an
Yeah.
envelope, and it ends up paying the bill that I was just stressing out about. Like, God, I don't know how we're going to make it through this month. I don't know how we're going to pay the film editor for Let My People Go. And literally every step of that film was some God encounter where uh, a a patron would materialize and he would pay for a month's worth of editing that I couldn't afford to pay. And that's been my life for 5 years. And so at some point, you go from being nervous and wrecked
Mhm.
to kind of looking forward to, like, oh, what's God going to do now? And then
Yes.
you express gratitude. And so I've gotten used to that, but I still struggle with it, especially now
Of
that
course.
Trump is in. It's like I would like to have some semblance of normalcy.
Right.
And I don't know if I'll ever have that, and I've gotta make peace with that.
Yeah, you will. But I that's what I just have to say is you will. But I have a question for you, your thoughts on something now that we're just talking about um happenings of the day. You know, your last video is so profound because you use those tentacles. Throughout your career, you've seen how those tentacles are in everything, layers of corruption. And so you've seen it firsthand over and over and over again
Mhm.
in every aspect of what you were involved with. So don't you feel that this has to be a war, the war that we're in, and I know your thoughts on this because I watch you and everything, that we're in this military operation, but there has to be a spiritual side to it in order to get those tentacles unstuck one at a time somehow in all those areas. Um, and I'm just wondering, and I'm so curious as to which tentacles are gonna pop first. Don't aren't you?
No, because when you understand the Leviathan, uh, it doesn't matter which ones pop first. You just have to be prepared for the replacement. And and as long as there is a deep state and an intelligence
Mhm.
apparatus behind it, they will create new arms. And so you can't
Yeah,
get too caught up in we cut off the Dominion arm because look what
right.
happened. Liberty votes here.
Yes,
And that's
right.
never going to end unless you have such a key unbrainwashing of the American people with respect to these
Yeah,
systems. And the only way that that can be done is through Trump um, executing an executive order that is so inherently shrouded in his national security powers commander in chief that he
right.
is not in a position of asking permission from a court or the legislature. It's got to come from evidence that will be presented to the American people that you guys have had rigged elections for decades, and
Yes.
I think he's going to do that. So the question I wrestle with isn't so much about trying to predict who's going to fall first, who's going to be arrested next. It really has everything to do with building up a stamina and resilience, and really thinking on the words of Thomas Jefferson, which he said to you know, the cost of liberty is eternal vigilance. So you're basically committing and pledging to God Almighty that I will fight against evil and slavery because this is what I feel like I am. I feel like I'm an abolitionist. I see the black boxes as slave masters. And
Mhm.
so I've pledged, before God, I've made covenant with him that every day that I'm alive, as long as you're going to equip me with resources to fight, I'm going to fight. And when you call me home, whether that's tomorrow or 20 years from now, I just want to have him say that you did everything with what I gave you. And that's all I wrestle with. And so that allows you to stay away from being demoralized, because demoralization is the great kind of douser of the hope that we need to keep fighting. And so
Yes.
many people that I'm around are constant. All they have to offer is um, is their cynical critiques of hopelessness.
Right.
And like, well, I don't know what to do with that. And so it's like kind of like, get behind me, Satan. With that, I don't need to hear it. You might be right, but what do you want me to do? Do nothing? So I can say
Exactly.
you're right, and then we can just say goodbye to uh, America.
Right.
So that's kind of been my meditation, and I have this optimism that I know is spiritual, because I can't prove to people why I'm, you know, why I believe that Trump is who I think he is, and why I think we're going to get our country back. But at some point, I think victory is going to be objective. It's going to be objectively seen and known. And if I'm on the right side of history, I think opportunities will present themselves for me and my family.
Hmm.
And if we don't win, um, you know, I'll be put in the gulag or whatever. But at least I'll know that I was faithful. And I can't control, the outcome. But I'm going to be a servant of God.
Amen to that. And I feel exactly the same way. I haven't had been put in position where I see what you have seen, as much, but darn it, I have that same optimism, and it is a spiritual thing, and I know without a shadow of a doubt it's gonna happen, and we've won, and, however it plays out is how it's supposed to play out, and this is just oh, this has just been such a joy and a blessing to speak with you, David. I can't thank you enough, and I'll make sure to have all your information in my video that I post, and because everything you do is precious and wonderful, and I have renewed faith talking to somebody like you, because boy, you've seen a lot and you still are fighting with optimism, and that is the greatest gift and joy any of us can bring. So
Mhm.
thank you, David, so much for spending some time with me. It's just been the greatest pleasure. I can't tell you enough.
Well, thank you, Alan. I appreciate you and what you're doing. And I felt like I found a new friend. So keep in
Yay!
touch.
I will. Thank you so much, David, so much. Take care.
Okay.
Bye bye.